When I originally started writing this solo episode, I had planned to discuss various business models and how it is important for you to decide first on the type of lifestyle you want to have, and then decide on the business model. But in between the beginnings of writing this and, well, now, once again, so much of how we view the world has changed. In trying to be active and informed citizens, just by opening our Instagram, we're bombarded with painful images of families fleeing from their homes to escape unspeakable atrocities. While on vacation, visiting family in Tuscany last month, which, to be honest, just saying out loud feels like it oozes with privilege alongside everything that's happening, I was struck with the unsettling realization that I was reading a book citing the work that was done almost 8 years ago to advance the rights of the LGBTQ community around the world at the UN, only to then open my phone and read the news headlines that night about how the rights of trans children here in the US are being stripped away. It's a heavy time to process the state of the world. And while I don't think our brains were built to cope with this much information on a daily basis, I also don't want to ever consider the world where we aren't able to raise our voices in frustration and enact change faster thanks to how information now spreads. But this is not a news podcast, and it is not going to become a news podcast. So why do I mention it all? Especially when you were probably coming here to escape all that heaviness a little bit? Well, the way in which our businesses intersect and impact the world around us, both personally and on a larger scale, is exactly what this week's solo episode is going to be about. And if you're over there on the other side of the earbuds thinking, I don't have a business, Rebecca, I'm just a hobbyist who sort of, kind of, maybe dreams about one day being able to sell my work. Well, my friend, trust me when I say this episode is still for you. So let's talk about it. This is the Maker's Playbook, the show all about what it's really like to make a living from the things you make. I'm your host, Rebecca Ikes Kara. Okay, so the reason I bring this all up is because you probably know this podcast does focus quite a lot on how independent artists can build viable businesses. And since I've seen an exciting increase in our little slice of the internet audience, even just in the past couple of months, thanks in no small part to all of your wonderful support and your sharing of these episodes with your own maker friends, on your Instagrams, with your community studios. Thank you for sharing. So with all of that, it's widening our audience. I feel the need to make it clear a few things about my own businesses. Now, a quick side note. I'm not going to dive deep down the subject right now. So if you missed episode number 121, where I talk about how you should vet your sources for online education, after you finish this episode, I'd suggest going back and listening to that one. It's technically the 4th week of the photography extravaganza from last summer, so you'll get some bonus photo tips too. But in that episode, I talk about the importance of thinking critically about online education, particularly given the seemingly endless sources out there touting themselves as experts and educators on Instagram and YouTube and wherever else on the internet. But I digress. Just go listen to that episode after this one, and hopefully the connection will make sense. Back to the topic at hand. Why do I feel the need to clarify the core values I've built my own businesses on as this podcast grows? Well, because business is political. Now, that statement right there might have made some of you cringe. In fact, I bet I have some relatives listening that are cringing. Sorry, guys. Love you. You might have thought, no, Rebecca. I'm going to keep my personal opinions out of my business or out of my side hustle. I want to just take nice photos of my work, post it online, maybe sell it to some people, then move along with my day. That's what I'm here for. That's why I'm listening. Don't start merging your political opinions with your photo tips. Well, here's the thing, my friends. When you buy something from someone, whether it be a small independent business like yours and mine, or a big box store like Amazon, you are making an exchange. You are giving someone else a certain dollar amount, and then that person is taking those dollars, or euros, or pounds, or whatever currency you work in. They're taking that money and choosing to do something with it. Maybe they're choosing to provide their employees with amazing family benefits, like a livable wage and the potential for childcare located at their facilities, as Alex Matisse of East Fork Pottery discussed back on episode 123. On the other hand, maybe they're taking that money you gave them and working the loopholes of regulations to employ the gig economy of part-time workers with no rights to benefits and increasing their shareholders' already insane profits. You get my point. But let's consider this at a smaller scale for you and me, for all of the side hustlers out there. When someone buys your work from you, particularly for those who still have full-time jobs, and the sales that you make in your side hustle are sort of like quote-unquote bonus money, right? You get to choose how to spend that money. Maybe you choose to use that money you earned to buy a book. Did you buy the book from a small, local, independent bookstore? Or did you buy it from Amazon? It seems like a trivial decision, but think about what a big difference it might be to work at a small local bookstore versus to run back and forth down the massive aisles of an Amazon fulfillment center. Now, I know I'm just throwing Amazon under the bus here, but it's an easy, internationally known brand, so you can use other business examples also. The point is, all of these purchasing decisions add up. And they add up in ways that give some people, like Amazon, a lot of power in influencing policy, politics, and a whole host of other things that directly impact our daily lives. If you don't believe me, a quick Google search of how small businesses impact their local economies should give you some pretty consistent results. You see what I'm getting at here? How you spend your money is one of the fastest ways to impact the state of the world. While we need to push for systemic change, and for those of us in countries that are able, be sure to get out and vote for representatives that are committed to those needed changes, I'm pretty sure no matter what country you live in, we all would agree that the speed at which politics changes is painfully slow. On the other hand, the speed of the economy and the power of money, well, that has some serious potential to make some big changes within our lifetime. Now, before I keep using these words that are probably making you inch closer and closer to wiping the mud off your hands and hitting next on your podcast player, you know the words I'm talking about. Sales, business, money, all the words that for some reason in the arts world are the greatest of taboos. Let's get real for a second. I started the Maker's Playbook because I wanted to have candid conversations with ceramicists and makers about how they actually make a living from the things they make. And so many of you seem to connect with the question of how to do that very thing. So why is it when I say make a living, the reaction is, yes, that's what I want to do. But when I say marketing, sales, or business, people stop making eye contact with me. Now, I know you can't actually make eye contact with me over this podcast, but I've had enough of these conversations in person to know what the reaction is. My friends, making a living from the things you make means you have to sell your work. Last time I checked, my mortgage lender was not willing to accept a new set of bowls in exchange for this month's payment, no matter how impressive Francesco's throwing skills are. Now, This discomfort in sales and marketing in the arts world is a whole different conversation for another episode. But I want to acknowledge it in the hopes that you'll stick with me here on this episode and keep your mind open to hearing those uncomfortable words. Even if you are just, and I'm using air quotes over here, just a hobbyist right now who wouldn't even say that you have a business. If you dream of being full-time, making your work, and having no other job, my friend, you are dreaming of owning a business. So, back to the matter at hand. Businesses being political. Why am I bringing it up before we dig into the myriad of different business models you can pursue to build the life of your dreams? Well, frankly, because at a time like this, when I'm presented with all the ways in which the world needs fixing, I find myself wondering what the hell I'm doing. How is talking about how to take better photos with your phone going to help refugees? Why should I be promoting my free 3-step cheat sheet to taking better photos at a time when we should all be screaming from the rooftops about the blatant sexism and racism so clearly on display during a Supreme Court confirmation hearing here in the US? Sometimes, honestly, my work feels a little disconnected. And I'm guessing you might feel the same way if one of your shop updates happens to collide with yet another terrible hate crime committed against the Asian community. So here's where I've landed. Economics, also known as money, is a faster way to bring about change in the world than politics. And when you have enough money to take care of yourself, when you can provide for a stable life and not have the mental burden of worrying about your basic needs or your family's safety, then you can have the freedom and flexibility to also help others in bigger ways. Combine that with the autonomy that is central to being self-employed, and well, now we've got a pretty powerful combination for change. And this is why, amidst the world feeling like it's never going to right itself, I'm still talking about helping other makers start and build life-giving, viable businesses. Let me give you a quick example. When I first started my photography business 11 years ago, I didn't take out any business loans. I worked 2 part-time jobs on top of starting my own business so that every dollar my business made, I could put back into the business to get it off the ground. My part-time jobs allowed me to pay my half of the rent and buy groceries and all the other basic stuff I needed. Doing this meant I often got up at about 4 o'clock in the morning to catch a bus to go downtown Chicago and work the opening shift at a local coffee shop. I'd work a 6-hour shift or so and be back at my computer in my apartment answering client emails early enough in the day for no one to ever realize I had another job. And then, in the late afternoon or evening, I'd head out to part-time job number 2 and nanny for families. It was a level of sleep deprivation only possible when you're 23 years old, and something that will probably still stress my mom out hearing the retelling of this story when she listens to this episode. But it got the business off the ground, and for that I am grateful. What's this example have to do with changing the world, though? Well, because during that grueling first year with that insane schedule, I wasn't contributing meaningfully to my communities. I didn't have the luxury or the flexibility to volunteer with organizations I believed in or donate to causes at a time of crisis. I realized all of this a few years later when I found myself volunteering for an entire day downtown in a building right across the street from that cafe. After I had finished volunteering, I walked into that cafe for a tea, and I realized I would have never been able to participate in the meaningful work I had done if I was still undercharging for my photography services. Now, I know we all struggle with pricing our work and with accepting how much we really do have to charge in order to make a viable living. And that's a conversation for another day. But I bring it up because that day which was about 6 years ago now, I turned a mental corner and finally understood that in order to actually do good things in the world and help others, I had to take care of myself first. Now, let's be clear. I'm not giving the Jeff Bezoses of the world a free pass here. There are some people with an access to obscene amounts of money in this world that is just not necessary and contributes to the vast disparity of the haves and the have-nots. But for us regular people, I want to encourage you and myself that we all need to earn as much money as we need and then a little bit more. Why? Because think about how amazing it would feel to donate a life-changing amount of money to your favorite nonprofit, exactly in the moment that they need it. Think of how amazing it must feel for Fee to tell their teachers they'll be making $66 an hour teaching at their community studio. Based upon the reactions I got from everyone online after Fee's story went live, which was just the last episode that we launched. If you missed it, after this, go back and listen. Based on all those reactions that I was getting in my DMs on Instagram, I'd say that rate is more than any art instructor has ever dreamed of. And as Fee made clear, that only became possible once they first had a stable financial life themselves. Now, this brings up a few different topics, so I'm going to get back on track from where we originally started. The point of all of this is to say, I firmly believe the more independent small businesses there are in the world creating viable, life-giving work, the better the world will be. And that's why I'm here. I'm committed to teaching artists how to start and grow their own businesses because that's the skill set that I can bring to the world. And I'm saying it out loud, awkwardly, and frankly uncomfortably on this side of the podcast microphone, to remind myself that when I'm on Instagram stories encouraging all of you to pop your email into a form so you can snag our free 3-step cheat sheet on taking better photos faster, even with your phone. I'm not doing that so disconnected from the larger issues of our day. I'm doing it because of the larger issues of our day. I want thousands of makers to download our cheat sheet and start taking better photos of their work in order to sell more of their work online, in order to provide for their families, and in order to support their communities. And if they can sustainably support themselves, then in turn, they can support others. If they grow viable businesses, they can hire an employee. And because they know how broken the system is, they can provide that employee with flexible work hours that fit around the realities of their life and a livable wage with a safe work environment, respect, and dignity. Crazy concept, right? Or, if the idea of having a team and employees is overwhelming, maybe the definition of your own successful, viable business model is simply the ability to take a Tuesday off, to take your kids to a peaceful protest, showing them the power of individuals gathering together and the importance of standing up to injustices in this world. Maybe it's just making a secure enough income for the first time to be able to choose to shop at your local small businesses, even if it costs a little bit more, instead of needing to shop at big box stores in order to safely pay the bills. Cue the segue. Because this is the part where we actually start digging into the variety of business models out there, as I mentioned at the start of this episode. Yes, I know you're all relieved. Thanks for sticking with me. So, the point of it all, we're going to keep talking about art and what we make and how we make a living from what we make. Not because we're oblivious to the big, heavy, massively important issues constantly facing the world as we know it, but precisely because of them. We can't all be doctors and diplomats and NGO leaders, but we can all find a way that our unique skill sets and passions can positively impact the world around us, big and small. At least that's what I'm telling myself right now. So, let's get you started on this dream, shall we? At the start of this episode, I mentioned the importance of deciding on what you want your life to look like first, and then deciding on your business model second. Before we get into those exact business models, let me explain what I mean by that a little bit more. I think I can safely assume that if you're listening to this podcast, then you have a hobby or a passion for some kind of craft. Maybe the especially muddy one of ceramics. And you love making your work. So when I say decide what you want life to look like first, you might immediately think of a life where you spend all day in the studio, your hands covered in clay. But I want you to take that and go about 5 steps farther. As I already mentioned, if you're making a living from the things you make, you need to sell that work. So how is it that you want to sell your work? If you're a classic introvert, you might want to sell your work online so that you can avoid having to stand in a booth at a busy market full of face-to-face small talk conversations with strangers all day long. But then at the same time, selling your work online means having to sort out the details of packaging and shipping, and if you want to sell internationally, you have to figure out customs, and it's a whole mess. You thoroughly hate the idea of having to spend an entire day, if not 2, in a sea of boxes and packaging material. Okay, so what business model is available to you then? The person who doesn't want to sell in person to loads of people at a local market or a festival, but also is not excited about the idea of selling online. Well, maybe you should consider something like wholesale relationships, where you can cultivate one-on-one relationships with shop owners. They do the selling to the masses for you, but at the same time, you can personally drop off an order to a local boutique without having to stress about packaging up 100 individual items to 100 different mailing addresses. Now, I want to pause for a second and make something clear. I'm not necessarily saying that this is the solution. I'm just giving you an example of how I want you to think through the question that I posed at the beginning. Defining what you want your life to look like first before deciding what your business will look like. So let me try that from a different angle. If you've been listening to the podcast, even for just an episode or 2, then you probably know that my full-time job at this point is still my wedding photography business, while ceramics is my husband's profession and my personal side hobby that I dream of spending more time on, just like most of you. So when we go through this process of looking at the lifestyle created by a job, here's what it looks like with weddings. In the US, particularly in the Midwest region, which is where we live, most weddings happen between May and November on the weekends, particularly Saturdays. Meaning, my busiest time of year is from May to November. And we're talking busy in the kind of way that a maker's life is busy from like September to January in terms of the lead up and the intensity of holiday sales. Not just in the act of photographing weddings on those Saturdays for 10 to 12 hours, but also in preparing, processing, editing, and delivering all of that work. So let's set that alongside the fact that Francesco and I one day want to have a family and that we have family members overseas. For kids in the US, their extended holiday is summer vacation from basically June to the end of August, more or less. So in this hypothetical situation, if we wanted our hypothetical kids to have the chance to hang out with their cousins, the one time of year when we could hop on a plane and go to Italy without those hypothetical kids missing a significant amount of school would be between June and August. Are you starting to see how this whole deciding about life before deciding about business thing is pretty important? Because as it stands right now, these 2 different things, a career in wedding photography and quality time with family overseas, are pretty opposing forces, aren't they? Now, obviously, 12 years ago, I had no idea I'd be thinking about these things. Hell, I only met this man that I get to now call my husband 2 years ago. So clearly, as your life and needs change, your business needs will change. But Whether you are just in the dreaming stage about potentially starting a business, or if you're a decade in and realizing something's going to have to change, this same mental exercise, thinking about your ideal lifestyle first and then finding the right business model second, will still apply as your life changes and grows. So, now that we've talked about all of that, let's talk about those business models finally for a second, right? The way I see it, there are two major aspects to consider, specifically as a maker. First, how the work gets made and what that lifestyle looks like. And second, how the work gets sold and what that lifestyle looks like. So, first up, making the work. You might be thinking, well, duh, Rebecca, the reason I'm listening to this podcast is because I want to make more of my work, just like I'm doing right now. All right, cool. So just like you're doing right now, how long does it take you to make that work? Sticking with the ceramics example, just for the ease here, hypothetically, how long does it take you to make something like a mug? And at the current price point you sell that mug for, how many mugs would you need to sell per month in order to provide for your life? And is the amount of time it's going to take you to make that many mugs a reasonable amount of time to plan for working in your studio every day, week, or month? For the potters and ceramicists out there, I'm talking specifically about the physicality of our work in particular. Can you sit down at the wheel for 6 hours, 5 or 6 days out of the week, if that's how long you need to make enough mugs per month to pay the bills? Now, I know going through all of this is probably feeling overwhelming, and I don't want you to get discouraged here. And there are plenty of solutions to this problem, and I'm not suggesting that in order to make a living as a ceramicist, the only option is to learn how to slip cast so that you can mass produce all of your pieces faster. No. That is obviously an option if you want that and if you like that idea, but it's not the only solution. And I'm sure that Kurt Hamley would tell you it's not that much of a time saver, all right? But maybe instead, going through this exercise makes you aware of the fact that if you want to go full-time with this, then you're going to need to prioritize taking some classes on production throwing so that you can be more efficient with your time. Or maybe if you love sgraffito work or have highly decorative surfaces, it means you need to look into partnering with a production thrower who can sell you blank cylinders, and you can prioritize your time on your surface decorations rather than throwing and carving together. I don't want to get into the weeds on this too much with this particular subject, since this episode is already feeling pretty long-winded. Instead, I just want you to go through this exercise and maybe even consider journaling about what these different needs are, what it would really look like, and then as many different solutions to any of the sticking points that are coming up in your mind as you can think of. If you get stuck on coming up with those solutions, feel free to email me at rebecca@makers-playbook.com and we can brainstorm together. Because for the sake of not making this the most overwhelming podcast episode ever created, I'm going to move on to the different sales models available. All right, hang in there with me. So, selling your work. Here's the first few sales models that come to my mind. You can sell direct to the consumer, meaning you create your work and you sell it straight to the people that want to own it. This is typically the most obvious business model and the thing that appears to be the most prevalent on Instagram and online. And of course, there are a couple of different ways you can do this. You can sell online, like a platform like Etsy or your own website. And as we've already mentioned, and we all know too well, this involves plenty of shipping and packaging. And also, of course, there's the different realities between selling on Etsy versus selling on your own website. And for that discussion, you should dig back into the archives to episode number 107, where I discuss making decisions for ourselves and how to ask better questions online in order to actually help with all of those decisions, particularly the Etsy and website one. So, direct to consumer, that's the first business model. You can do it online. You can also obviously sell in person. The first option for this I think of is in-person art fairs, markets, or pop-up shops. This might mean that you need to live somewhere close to where your ideal audience lives, or where there are strong markets to be involved in. Or it might mean that your life will involve a bit more travel if you need to go from market to market and you don't live close. Essentially, you're trading the time spent in shipping and packaging for online sales instead with the time spent standing in some kind of booth or retail space or possibly traveling. Now, I'm listing off these different sales models as they come to mind. So if I've missed some, definitely tag me on Instagram at the Maker's Playbook or send me a DM with other examples, because I'm sure there has to be other makers out there thinking up creative ways to run their businesses, and those are precisely the people I want to be interviewing on the podcast. But for now, we'll leave sales model number 1, direct to consumer, with these two options: selling directly to the customers online or selling in person at markets or pop-up shops. Which brings us to sales model number 2, selling business to business, otherwise known as the dirty little word most makers hate, wholesale. Now, what's the reality of a wholesale business look like? Well, it could mean having one customer, like a local coffee shop, who buys 50 mugs. On the plus side, instead of packaging up 50 individual mugs to ship out to 50 individual different Etsy customers, you only have one customer you have to deal with, which also means not only do you have less packaging, you have one email thread to respond to. And you can load up all 50 of those pieces together and make one drop off to one location. Awesome. On the flip side, it typically means that the store you're selling to wants to be able to sell your work at a profit for their business as well, meaning they need to be able to buy it at a low enough rate to then mark up the price and sell it to their own customers. Hence, the sticking point for many makers, the idea of selling your work for quote-unquote less, only to see it being sold at a higher rate. Maybe that price is worth it, not having to deal with the customer service issues. Maybe it's not. These are the things you have to decide on for yourself. We could also loosely lump selling your work through galleries into this category, since it involves you as the maker getting a portion of the price of the sale rather than the full amount, in exchange for someone else doing more of the sales and customer service work. Now, of course, there are a lot of other business models we could add to this list. Things like running community spaces for other makers in your field or teaching, but I specifically wanted to keep the guardrails of this conversation on business models that directly involve making and selling your work. And if you haven't noticed over the course of the last year of this podcast, I've been trying my best to feature as many diverse business models as possible. We've had makers who came up with their own solutions to direct consumer sales, like the front porch pop-up shops of Kate McElwee on episode 109, to a commissions-focused business-to-business sales model with David T. Kim on episode 204. If one of these business models has piqued your interest and you don't think you found an episode here on the podcast that discusses it, then send an email to podcast@makers-playbook.com and I will link you over to the right episode. Or, if an episode doesn't actually exist because I haven't found a maker with that business model yet, then you and I can brainstorm together and search for that maker so that I can interview them. Because here's the moral of this very long story. There are endless examples out there of how to make this work. For every person that says Etsy sucks, there's someone who's found massive success on the platform. For every traditional extrovert that loves standing at a stall in a festival or a market for an entire weekend, there's a maker who would rather spend 2 days surrounded by packaging materials and address labels in the privacy of their home after a big online sale. There's not a right or a wrong way. There's no better or worse. There are simply pros and cons of each business model that may or may not suit your life better. So bringing it all full circle here. That's why I started this out by saying you must decide on what you want your life to look like first, and then on the business model second. And as I hope you know by now, I'm only an email away to help with that business model, because I'm here to see the world become a better, more equitable place by empowering more small business owners. If all of this has been epically overwhelming, and the idea of even thinking about the decisions is enough to make you never want to start your own business, then fear not, my friends. I, of course, have a free resource for you. As soon as you can clean the mud off your hands or put the car in park, come visit makersplaybook.com/guardrails for my Savvy Owner's Quick Guide to Smart Decisions. It's a free PDF that will help walk you through the steps of thinking through decisions. Because as always, you know I love simplifying the overwhelming by making a step-by-step system for you. Once again, that's makersplaybook.com/guardrails for the free guide. All right, my friends, this was a heavy one. Frankly, it took me a lot longer to write than I anticipated. So I'm going to give you plenty of time to think on it and re-listen to it, because I'll be taking a short season break now. The goal is to have the next series of interviews prepped and ready for you by the end of April. That is just one very short month away. I already have a few interviews in the lineup for you, but I also don't quite know exactly when that restart date will be. Now, this is going to sound like a cheesy commercial, but let me tell you, you are not going to want to miss what's in store. Since I don't have that exact start date ready for season 3 just yet, if you want to make sure you're not going to miss out on when the new episodes do actually air, then hop on over to makersplaybook.com/newsletter to sign up for our email insiders list. Doing so will also put you on the list for the free monthly photo tips I send out specifically for ceramicists and makers. So it's, basically a win-win. If you're listening to this episode in real time, that monthly photo tip is coming your way next week. So, all right, until next time, until season 3, go get back to making your dreams a reality. Because together, we've got this.